Hey everyone, it's Destiny Moon here. We're kind of switching things up a little bit. Today, we're not doing Drinks with Destiny. We are going to talk about a controversial subject about capital punishment, and which is the death penalty here in the United States. I want to talk about the myths surrounding that and my personal experience. I have learned so much as far as factual information that has made me be completely adamantly against it. One is that the death sentence costs less than a life sentence. This is absolutely not the case. We're thinking that because we have to house them and feed them that it costs more, but it actually doesn't because of the appeals process and how it works in the court system. So it's absolutely not true. It's the only truly irreversible form of punishment. And we're going to touch base again in the myths. All of these things kind of become intertwined. Studies of the California death penalty system, the largest in the U.S., have revealed that a death sentence costs at least 18 times as much as the sentence of life without parole would cost. Myth number 2, the death penalty makes us safer. There's no evidence that the death penalty deters murder any more than the threat of other punishments, such as life in prison. If the death penalty actually deterred crime, then states with the death penalty would be safer than those without, and that is absolutely not the case. As a matter of fact, it's just the opposite. In states such as New York, New Mexico, Illinois, and Connecticut, over the years, after they repealed the death penalty, there was actually less murder in those states. Myth number 3, the death penalty is the only way to provide closure to victims' families. And this is where it gets personal for me, because we actually had a murder in our family in 1993. And I was a witness in this case. He killed one other person besides my then mother-in-law. And I wanted him to die. I absolutely wanted him to die. It was, to me, the best thing that could happen. I had no idea what this entailed, to have somebody sentenced to death, and what it would do to our family in the 16 years we spent in court. 16 years. Other people, it's decades. It's longer than that. We had 4 trials. 4. 2, he was convicted to death. 3, the other one was just appealed. The 4th one, we just decided to go for natural life. And that's where he is now. He has natural life in prison. So we prolonged the suffering of our entire family just by really insisting that we needed to have the death penalty. What happens is in the appeals process, they get an automatic appeal no matter what. So, there was an appeal, and he's sentenced to death again, and then he's in the library in prison, and we know for a fact he did it. This is not an innocent man that's getting sentenced to death. He admitted to his crimes, and now he's spending natural life in prison, which is a death sentence, because he's going to die there. And I look forward to that time. But there was a time where I really thought that I wanted to actually see him die. I wanted to be part of that process. And you know what? When I think about it now, I can't even imagine. I can't. We're in such a different place now, and our lives are so different. It affects us in very strange ways. Myth 4, the death penalty is the only way to make sure that a convicted murderer is never released from prison. The only difference in this respect between a death sentence and a life sentence is that with a life sentence, there is no risk of a prisoner being found innocent after they've been executed. Myth 5, an innocent person has never been executed. The execution of an innocent person is a wrong that can never be put right. Since the 1970s, 161 people on death row have been exonerated of their crimes. It's why the appeal system is in place, but that doesn't mean that innocent people have not been put to death. We don't know how many innocent people have been executed, but it's hard to prove, because it's hard to prove, but death penalty lawyers have enough resources to work on the case of live clients, much less for those who are no longer living. I do want to talk about a couple of people in particular that kind of stick out in my head, and I'm going to provide some links below so you can look at it a little bit deeper if you're really interested in doing so. But George Stinney was a 14-year-old black boy, and he was electrocuted in South Carolina in 1944. He was 14. for the murder of Betty June Binnicker at age 11, as well as Mary Emma Thames, age 8. The arrest occurred inside of Clarendon County, South Carolina. This case still remains a very controversial one due to the fact that the judicial process showed severe shortcomings. An example can be made out of this case by showing the judicial system does not always properly orchestrate. He was the youngest person executed in the United States. More than 70 years later, a judge threw out the conviction, calling it a great injustice. He was 14 years old. Another great informational site to look at is the Innocence Project, and I'm going to provide a link below on that as well, in the case specifically here in Phoenix, Arizona, on Ray Crone, and that he served 10 years on death row for the murder of a young bartender, and then later on with DNA testing, he was exonerated of the crimes due to the DNA in saliva and blood. And they did find actually the person who did murder her that lived very close by her. Another important fact is that Ray Crone spent 10 years on death row, 10 years in prison of his life of a crime that he did not commit. He had no previous record, and he was an honorably discharged veteran. So again, you know, if this had been before DNA testing, he may be dead right now. Let's talk about the Department of Corrections personnel and what this does to them. The federal government plans to execute 5 prisoners over a 5-week period of time in December of 2019 and January of 2020. According to Alan Alt, a former chief of the Justice Department's National Institute of Corrections, the damage executions inflict on correctional staff is deep. This compressed schedule of 5 executions in this short period of time causes an extended disruption to normal prison operations and precludes any attempt to return to normalcy following an execution. This increases the risk that something could go horribly wrong in the next execution, and if a routine execution is traumatizing for all involved, a botched one is even more devastating. There hasn't been a federal execution since 2003, and the prisoners under federal death sentences have been safely managed by the Bureau of Prisons and high-security federal prisons. So in closing, take the time to read the links below, and I will look forward to any questions that you have or any thoughts or any ideas, anything about any next video that you want to talk about. Our next one is going to be, can we find compassionate and kind healthcare in the United States? And I look forward to hearing from you soon.